numbers are in. Spot rates, they have fallen to what level? We'll find out in a moment. And Florida, year over year, this is going to surprise you today on Sales Chatter.
Welcome to the HPLS podcast. Live, relevant, and high performance information, conversations, and education weekly.
Hey everybody, welcome back. And today is Data Day. We're a day late on Data Day. Yes, we are. We know that. You know that because you're here live, you're watching, doesn't matter. We've got Dean and Jeff with us today to talk a little bit about Florida. We're going to talk a little bit about rates, Dean. And then I know you also want to talk a little bit about the year over year and what's happening. Gentlemen, welcome back. Dean, welcome back to North America, buddy.
Yeah, thank you. Good to be back. A little bit jet lagged.
I bet.
Here. Yeah.
Did you get enough sleep?
Not much. It was 33 hours door to door. And that included a 5-hour delay in Los Angeles because of equipment problems yesterday morning, which is the last thing you need when you get off a 15-hour flight.
Well, you were on a Boeing plane.
Actually, you're right. It came off an Airbus 350 onto a Boeing 757. You're right. Exactly.
I that's one thing that when I used to do a ton of traveling that I always got so frustrated with was the delays. I just, no matter what you do, and so I don't know about you guys. Here's what I'm facing over the last little while, and I'd love your therapeutic conversation on it for a minute, Dean, before we jump in. So more and more, I'm starting to really analyze things if they're productive or not. And what I mean by that is I feel like I lost almost 2 years of productivity with being ill and then trying to get back into it and everything. So I look at everything as a productivity measurement. Like, what else could I be doing that's more productive at this point in time? Like, I'm talking anything from driving to the grocery store to, everything, guys. And it's actually not necessarily driving me nuts, but driving me nuts because it's all I can think about. Like, we were stuck in traffic this morning and all I could think about is, I could be doing something way more productive right now. When I was telling Jeff off air, my doctors didn't put in the blood requisition. So an appointment that was supposed to be 30 minutes ended up being like 2.5 hours. And the whole time my brain is going, you know what I could be doing right now if I had my laptop? Like I could be doing things. I could be selling. I could be doing what I need to do in order to improve my life and all that. And I don't know about you guys, maybe I'm just really weird, but it's like I can't stop thinking about it.
Yeah, you know something? Here's the reality. You're not going to catch up on 724 days that you lost, right? 2 years.
I'm trying, brother. I'm trying.
So you got to let go of it and control the controllables that are right in front of you. Do what you can with what you have today. Right. Yesterday is gone, my friend. You have to just focus in on your priorities and what needs to be taken care of today.
And I mean,
not tomorrow, just
not to flog this horse at all, but it's what I'm doing. Like, I know I'm not going to make it back, but it's like, I literally do not want to take, and I know it's a Dan issue. I understand that. I don't want to take 5 minutes for myself because I'm like, I got to get this done today in order to quote unquote be productive. And I think I'm cramming so much into my day where literally I'll be at my desk, I'll be working, and I know I have to go to the bathroom and I'll wait like an hour until I'm literally like my eyeballs are floating before I like leave my desk. It's totally freaking crazy. So,
but seriously, Dan, take my advice, please. Sometimes you have to take time out for yourself. Yes. It's a necessity. You have to do that. So by you saying that, no, it's okay to do that. You have to break away so your train of thought gets more focused in. Because if you're entrenched in what you're doing and what's in front of you and you can't break away, you get overwhelmed very, very quickly because you start thinking of the what ifs and everything and how fast can I get it done and complete it so I can move on to the next one. Back away, walk away from it, clear your head, then get back.
That's good advice. And all of that led to this question, Dean. Did you get internet on the plane for those 33-something hours that you were up in the air?
No, where they gave us an announcement leaving Sydney that we don't have Wi-Fi on the A350. So on the way over, we had Wi-Fi the entire passage across the Pacific Ocean, which I was really surprised at, but nothing on the way back.
And did you utilize it on the way over?
I did a little bit as far as Hawaii. Then I got tired and then fell asleep. So
Yeah, well, I mean, Hawaii is what, like 6 hours from LA?
yep,
Like, yeah,
yep,
it's a long flight to get to Hawaii, right? So
yeah,
yeah.
yeah, surprising. Yeah,
Yeah. Oh,
It's even longer going to
yeah, I bet.
Australia.
yeah.
So, Dino, why don't we start from the top? So let's talk about January numbers.
Yeah.
The surprise that you've got for us for January numbers.
Yeah, like really amazing data came in from the IHS Market Peers data set that got certified a little bit later than usual. It got certified over the weekend, but January imports came in, was the fastest growth rate between December and January in like 7 years. Volumes came in 5% higher in January versus December. Really, really surprising. But when you take out 2020 and 2021, which are kind of those crazy pandemic years, January's data was the highest going back to 2017, like just extraordinarily high numbers. It pushed the numbers up to about 8.5% higher than January last year. So really high volumes at almost 2.28, so almost 2.3 million TEU, 20-foot equivalent units.
Do you know why?
A couple of theories why. There was a push to get inventory in ahead of Chinese New Year.
That makes sense. Yep.
A push to get inventory in because there'd been a more significant restocking or destocking last year. So maybe that was part of it. But I think we had Paul Brashear on our show yesterday from ITS Logistics in Reno. He's head of their drayage and intermodal division, and he thought it was exactly that. So I'd trust his judgment on that more than anything. Volume, what he did talk about, and this was borne out in the data, was that West Coast imports continue to grow at the expense of East Coast. So there's still that shift going on. West Coast volumes are up 18.2% year over year. East Coast up only 1.2% year over year. Los Angeles, the largest port in the country, number one port, volumes are up 23% in January compared to December. New York, number two port, only up 1.2% in January compared to December. So there is more volume. He put it down to two things that we've talked about on the show extensively. One was the potential labour disruptions on the East Coast, where the ILA labour agreement is due in September. Shippers, he said shippers were reluctant to leave themselves compromised by more supply chain disruptions. And the other point he made was, of course, the one we've talked about, which was the virtual shutting down of the Suez Canal. And that, he said, is he quoted, and I'll quote him, he said about 25% of the freight that used to go to the US East Coast via the Suez Canal potentially could go to the West Coast. So they were the two things that are forcing volumes up there. Well, he did mention another thing, and we've talked about it on the show, and that is the electric vehicle mandates that are going to come in and start to hit capacity pretty hard. He expects drayage capacity to tighten significantly in California because of all of the sorts of regs that are coming in over that. The hours of service regs, you've got local people have to have ELDs now. There's all sorts of impacts on the local guys. So you could expect some drayage issues on the West Coast. Just looking at the data more broadly, nationally, furniture still the number one import. No change. Furniture was 12.3%. Northeast Asia, which is principally China, volumes accounted for 58% of the imports. Volumes are up 17% year over year out of Northeast Asia, out of Southeast Asia, which of course is more Taiwan, probably not Taiwan, but maybe what would be the big ones down there, Southeast Asia. If I quickly click on that, I'm going to...
What, the ones in the Pac Rim, right?
Yeah, probably the ones that are going to come more via the Suez Canal. Those volumes are up 8% year over year. So we're certainly seeing an increase in volume out of Northeast Asia, which is more your Ningbo, Shanghai ports, where I think just over half of our volumes come in over the course of each year. So there's sort of the big stories. It's really a continuation of what we saw in December, which was this increase in volumes to the West Coast and decreasing volumes on the East Coast. I should quickly look at the Gulf Coast while we're here. Gulf Coast volumes are up 5.9% compared to this time last year. So that's kind of interesting. But the West Coast is certainly pulling back a lot of its market share. Just on the Suez Canal, I did read a good article in the Journal of Commerce today, and Peter Tershel said that the impact of the Suez Canal closure will turn out to be not nearly as significant as some are making out. Largely not because of the extra distance in sailing that's absorbed about 6% of capacity, but because the market is still oversupplied. So the overcapacity in the shipping market will be the thing that drives rates down throughout this year on the ocean side, not the Suez Canal, because it was already oversupplied and we're about to see a large order book of vessel builds start to come online. So more ships are being built. So the head of Maersk said that they expect a rebalancing of supply and demand to not really happen or equilibrium not to happen until 2028 in the ocean shipping space.
I find that very interesting, Dean, because I've been reading a lot of articles, and you probably have too, about depleting inventory in warehouses. They're trying to draw down. And with all this influx of increases that you're talking about, you would figure that that's going to increase the volume in these warehouses. So it's like, the heck's going on? It doesn't make any sense. And where are they putting this inventory if they're drawing down?
Well, and here's another thought, and only because I know what's coming up next. How does this increase in volume match the data of the next topic, which is rates are lower, the lowest since 2019? Like, to me, if there's more volume coming in, we've lost more carriers than there were. Should that not? And I'm sorry, I just realized I just gave away the second point, Dean. Sorry, guys. I'm like, sometimes you can't tell me what's happening on the show before, or else I'll give it away. I'm like those guys you don't want me to see a movie before you. So to me, I look at that and I say, okay, so volumes are up. I mean, when you're talking the equivalent of TEU units, that's a shit ton of volume. Like, that's a lot of volume. But rates are going I mean, obviously barring what you were talking about when it comes to like local drayage markets or that kind of stuff. But rates seem to be doing the exact opposite of what would typically be a volume, like what would typically follow volume, I guess, is I'm trying to get the words out.
Volume up, carriers going out of the market down. You figure that rates would start
capacity
rising.
would tighten.
The opposite.
Yeah, not yet. We've still got an excess of capacity, though, in the truckload market, Dan. Remember, international imports account for about 10% of truckload demand. So it doesn't move the needle nationally, but it does in port markets where the volume surges in, right? So it's not until that volume surges and exceeds the capacity of the contract freight market spilling into the spot market that you really start to see some volatility.
So when you talk about 90% of the stuff that's hauled in a truck has touched a ship, are we talking about components of what's being hauled? So, like, for example, you assemble washers and dryers in North America, but all the pieces come from overseas. So the pieces of what's assembled that we haul in trucks, 90% of those have touched an ocean ship, correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Correct. Because most of your truckload demand is going to come from industrial production and manufacturing here in the homeland, which could include parts and components from overseas.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Because if you look at iPhone, for example, it's like 16 different countries 16 different locations on 5 continents that actually create one iPhone. So I get what you're saying there. Yeah. Okay.
But just like the ocean market, we're still seeing an excess of capacity in the truckload market gravitate towards where demand is. And Bill Cassidy in the Journal of Commerce is going to come out this week with an article that talks about his truckload carrier index, which is now we've had all the Q4 2023 earnings calls with the large truckload carriers. We now know how many trucks they were reporting on the road at the end of the quarter. Bill's got this index built around the number of trucks the large TLs report back to 2006. And it comes in at I don't know if you remember, but we talked about this on the show last time. It was about 82% of the index that started in 2006. It's come in at just under 81% this time. So It's the lowest reading in this index since the start of 2018. So what that means is the industry has the capacity of the large truckload carriers continues to nosedive, like the nosedives relative to where they were at the peak of the pandemic. But large truckload carriers are still shedding capacity. They're still slow rolling driver hiring. They're not putting as many trucks on the road. They're trying to get. So if you think where are the number of trucks on the road now? When we reported this at the end of September, it was equal to Q2 in 2020 at the height of the pandemic. That's how many, it's sort of truckload, how many trucks are on the road. It's now got even less. It's gone back to where it was at the start of 2018.
Okay.
And so when you compare that to Jason Miller's truckload ton mile index, the latest November reading, and I think he'll have December's reading out this week, the November reading has truckload demand at about just above 2018 and 2019 levels.
Okay.
So if you think about
he didn't see anything. Yeah, he didn't see anything. I read something this morning to your point, Dean, where Jason said he doesn't see, he's like pessimistic. He doesn't see anything turning, where people say that it is going to start turning.
Right. So that's why you've seen the large truckload carriers moderate, their capacity levels, because they don't see a demand inflection until probably later in the year. So they're continuing to slow roll any additional capacity or hiring of drivers to meet that demand. We're certainly seeing that in the spot load market. This capacity is still exiting, albeit at a slower rate. So, Dan, the irrespective of demand, we're still seeing capacity levels exit the industry, right, to a level that's more closely aligned with where demand is. But demand is still trying to settle.
Yes.
Find a new home also.
Yeah. The new normal, I guess, is what we're talking about.
So imports was a good news story, but still didn't move the national needle, just like produce season starting in Florida is great for produce carriers in the Southeast, but at spot rates nationally still dropped.
Yes. So, and let's talk about Florida year over year, Dean. There's some pretty surprising numbers you're going to share with us here.
Yeah, the produce volumes out of Florida. So if you look at the top 5 states for truckload volumes last week, Washington State, 25,000, Arizona, the Winter Salad Bowl, Yuma, 13,000, Idaho, 12,000, Florida, 9,000, and wait for it, California, 8,000 truckloads last week. So normally our biggest state in the summer, California, is now number 5. It's even been surpassed by the volume of truckloads coming out of Florida. So it gives put into perspective how important it is. But when you put all those together, it still didn't do much to move the national rate needle, because produce volumes are still about, we're looking here, about 13% lower year over year in total. But out of Florida, I think they were about 38% lower. Let me just double check on that. 31% lower than this time last year.
31% so even though lower. And didn't Florida last year have that storm come through that ruined a ton of crops?
They did.
And they're still 31% lower this year than last year. What do they equate that to?
Good question. I don't know, Dan. I'd have to dig into the data to see why. If I click on Florida, I'm going to see tomatoes. So tomato crops down 36%, strawberries down 35%, cabbage up 13%, peppers and bells down 27%. So it's kind of down across the board with the exception of cabbage, which is a smaller volume component. Tomatoes are the big one, Dan. If you said, what's the volume? Why is the volume down? It's tomatoes mostly. But that could also be because tomato volumes coming across the southern border in Mexico are starting to increase. If I go to there, I can tell you that we're heading into the Mexico season. And if I click on where the biggest volume comes from, and I think it's Tamaulipas, tomato volumes are up 1% year over year there. And Sonora, which is the second one, volumes are flat also. So, I can't exactly answer that question, why they're down in California. I'd have to do some more research. I'm not up on that market just yet. Right. So produce season is starting, but I think the biggest story here is the impact of the floods in California, because California is sort of the big producer of volumes. You remember last year we talked about floods this time. Mm-hmm. It damaged the early plantings of the summer crop and some of the winter crops. It looks like almost a repeat of that this year. California is going to be what determines this market's direction. But and farmers are still waiting to get in on crops for field access. They've got to wait for the ground to dry out to affect to see what the damage is. But if I look at the USDA data, number of truckloads last week compared to this time last year, 84% fewer loads came out of California last week than they did the same time last year.
That's a lot.
But I think part of that's going to be lack of reporting, so there'll be a reporting lag. So I want to see how this evens out next week. But you can infer from that there was not a lot of stuff shipped because of the rains.
And they still shipped 8,000 truckloads last week of produce, and they're 84% down. Like, to me, that number says it all as to what's going on. Hence the reason capacity is not tightening, specifically in refrigerated or people that would use reefers to run dry freight, right? Because they're doing that as well. So there's a huge 360-degree view here that we're starting to get, which is very interesting.
Yeah. So I think, Dan, you're certainly down on volumes of produce, and it's going to be a big contributor to the spot market because a lot of produce moves on spot because of its time-sensitive nature and the timing of the harvest cycles, and just the lead time you get. You don't get a lot of lead time on produce when it's got to move.
And if the produce isn't moving, those guys are getting dry freight from somewhere.
What's that, Jeff?
I think we're going to see some rates on produce go up.
Yeah, so I was
84%. I mean, that's a huge number. You know they're going to have to make it up on the backside somehow.
Well, we're going to pay for it at the grocery store.
The prices will go up for growers, which is great for them, but less volume. Yeah. And I think the point to keep in here, this is going to emerge over the course of this year. I think I think most of the capacity that's exiting is in dry van power only. I think a lot of the produce haulers, the specialised produce haulers with new reefer motors and new equipment that have the right levels of cargo insurance, I think that market's much more stable. I don't expect the rate volatility to see in reefer that we'll see in dry van, and even to a lesser extent, less impact in flatbed because of the specialised nature of those two equipment types versus dry van. So, but I think if you think about California specifically, and Jeff's comment about rates, it's a really specialised part of the country to be hauling produce. You've got to have pretty good equipment, good drivers, good mile makers, and the latest equipment that costs a lot of money. You know, you've got to be pretty experienced at running a truck fleet to haul produce consistently and do it well. So I think that's less susceptible to the fly-by-nighters that came in probably during the pandemic and added a bit of extra capacity.
Makes sense.
So that's the sort of the net of it, Dan, is that rates dropped this week. They dropped about 5 cents a mile. Let me just quickly check in reefer. National average dropped 5 cents a mile to $1.67 in van, dropped 6 cents a mile. So they're sitting at about $2 a mile, excluding fuel. That's about 7 cents a mile lower than this time last year. Flatbed down 2 cents for the first time since September at $1.99. And contract rates still decreasing and at a faster rate in the last 2 weeks compared to the prior 2 weeks. So we're still in single-digit territory in terms of carriers lowering their rates for contract loads. And, of course, that's the longer-term play that we're watching for everybody, because that's the majority of freight that gets hauled in the market or on these contract rates. They're still dropping. They were flattening out and getting closer to 1 or 2% down. Remember, for most of last year, they were double-digit rate decreases. They slowed to single-digit rate decreases in the 3 to 5% down range. They're now up to 9%. So it wouldn't surprise me to see us head back into double-digit rate decrease territory for incumbent truckload carriers in the next couple of weeks.
That's already bringing it into desperate levels. If we start talking about double-digit decreases, that's crazy.
Yeah. So shippers still have pricing power. There's no question about that. That seems to be pretty obvious. And if you think about the truckload capacity index, it's still decreasing. Capacity still trying to modulate itself relative to where demand levels are. Everybody's still trying to find out where the bottom of the market is, for both rates and where demand is sort of going to reach that inflection point where it starts to materially increase. but certainly
that's been going on a while now.
Not this side of the halfway point in this year as it's panning out.